What if I told you right now that the entire luxurious, carefree life of the British aristocracy, which we so admire in the movies, was actually a grand illusion? It depended entirely on a vast secret world, safely hidden behind the thick stone walls of the mansions. The paradox is that the true masters of Victorian estates, those who actually controlled every breath of this gigantic machine, never in their lives wore silk dresses or drank tea from expensive porcelain in grand drawing rooms. This entire system, running as flawlessly as a Swiss watch, rested solely on the shoulders of people whose faces the lords sometimes didn't even notice, and whose names were rarely recorded in the historical chronicles. Just imagine, their daily routine consisted of 16 hours of non-stop labor in damp, dark servants' corridors where sunlight never penetrated. One wrong step meant a harsh penalty, and the slightest mistake could get you thrown out onto the street without a reference. Be sure to watch this video all the way to the very end, because today we're going to pull back the curtain and take a peek behind the scenes of the glamorous life. You'll learn what the true, sometimes terrifying price of impeccable English comfort was, and what dirty secrets were actually hidden behind the perfectly ironed, snow-white tablecloths of the local aristocracy. And halfway through the video, I'll tell you about one unspoken rule of survival for servants that will make your hair stand on end. Give it a like in advance, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and let's dive in. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the absolute rule of invisibility for domestic staff. The architecture of Victorian estates was designed with the complete separation of two parallel worlds in mind. Servants moved through narrow, dimly lit corridors that ran inside thick walls and between floors. These hidden passageways allowed maids and footmen to appear in rooms as if out of nowhere. The aristocrats wished to see only the result of the work, without noticing the actual process of cleaning or preparing the room. Every door in the house had a specific purpose depending on the status of the person entering. The grand entrance with its marble steps was reserved exclusively for the estate's owners and their high-ranking guests. The staff used inconspicuous side doors leading directly to the basement or to the back staircase. Coal, groceries, and laundry baskets were transported only through these hidden passages of the building. The appearance of a servant with a bucket or mop on the main staircase was considered a gross violation of established protocol. The windows of the servants' quarters were often located below ground level or opened onto enclosed inner courtyards. The glass in the staff rooms was sometimes frosted so that no one could watch the owners strolling through the garden. The space beneath the staircase consisted of a long series of pantries, kitchens, laundry rooms, and bedrooms. The ceilings here were significantly lower, and ventilation was practically non-existent, which meant the air was constantly stuffy. This entire underground labyrinth functioned as a single mechanism, ensuring the smooth running of life on the upper floors. The rule of silence was observed just as strictly as the rule of invisibility. Servants were forbidden to speak in the corridors louder than a faint whisper, especially near the master's quarters. A complex system of bells hung on a special board in the servants' corridor was used to summon staff. Each bell had its own unique tone and was connected by wire to a specific room upstairs. The footman had to instantly recognize the sound and respond to the call without delay. The daily routine began long before the owners of the vast house woke up. The junior maids descended the cold stairs at 5 in the morning to begin their duties. Their first task was to clean the fireplaces in all the main rooms, remove the ashes, and load new firewood. All the rough work had to be finished by 8 o'clock in the morning, while the hallways were still empty. Any encounter with the owners during the morning hours was considered a sign of poor organization. If a servant happened to encounter a member of the aristocratic family in the hallway, he was to immediately turn his back to the wall. This gesture symbolized the servant's complete absence from the space and his readiness to blend into the interior. Direct eye contact with the employer was permitted only when receiving direct instructions. Responses were to be brief, polite, and strictly to the point of the question asked. No personal conversations or small talk about the weather between the masters and the common servants were allowed. All this immense work was done solely to create the illusion of a carefree life upstairs. The aristocrats woke up in warm rooms, had breakfast on freshly ironed tablecloths, and walked on clean carpets. They rarely thought about how much effort was required to maintain this ideal order. An invisible army of workers performed their unnoticed feats daily in the basements of luxurious palaces. I'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think about this system of dividing people into the visible and the invisible? Share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The world of domestic servants had a much stricter class system than British aristocratic society. Under the roof of a single estate, there was a rigid hierarchy where everyone knew their exact place. Senior servants never interacted with their subordinates as equals and demanded unconditional respect. This internal social structure mirrored aristocratic customs down to the smallest detail. At the head of the male staff stood the butler, who possessed unquestionable authority. He was responsible for the wine cellar, the silverware, and the appearance of all the footmen in the house. The butler wore a formal suit that, from a distance, could be mistaken for the lord's own attire. His main task was to organize impeccable service during formal dinners and receptions. No employee had the right to question this man's decisions or orders. The women's quarters were managed by the housekeeper, whose authority was just as absolute. She kept a set of keys to all the pantries and linen closets on a special belt. The housekeeper wore dark dresses made of heavy fabric and a black silk apron. She personally hired and fired the maids, monitored their behavior and moral conduct. Every morning began with her detailed inspection of all work areas and a check of cleanliness. The owner's personal servants occupied a special, privileged position within this complex hierarchy. The lord's valet and the lady's lady-in-waiting were exempt from heavy physical labor and cleaning duties. They were exclusively responsible for the wardrobe, hairstyles, and personal errands of their high-ranking employers. These employees had access to the most private rooms and knew many of the family's secrets. The rest of the staff viewed the personal servants with a noticeable mix of envy and respect. Below them in the hierarchy were the senior footmen and head maids, who performed more skilled work. The footmen served meals at the table, greeted guests in the hall, and escorted carriages. Maids cleaned the reception rooms, kept the bedrooms tidy, and changed the linens. They wore clean and neat uniforms that emphasized the status of the wealthy household. These workers were already entitled to certain privileges and respect from the junior staff. The cook held a special position and effectively ran her own empire in the kitchen. She commanded the cooks and dishwashers, assigning tasks for preparing meals for the entire household. Even the butler recognized her authority, as the success of any reception depended on her skill. The cook often had a separate room next to the kitchen, so she could start work before dawn. She planned the menu, ordered the ingredients, and strictly monitored their use. At the very bottom of this social ladder were the junior maids and assistants. The dishwashers spent their days at huge sinks, scrubbing pots and pans clean of caked-on grease. The laborers chopped wood, carried heavy buckets of coal, and polished the shoes of the senior staff. This category of workers performed the dirtiest and most grueling work on the estate. Their names were often not even remembered. They were simply referred to by their job titles. The division into ranks was evident even during shared meals in the servants' dining hall. Seats at the long table were assigned strictly according to rank. The butler always sat at the head of the table, while the housekeeper was seated at the opposite end. The junior staff sat on wooden benches at the very edge and ate in complete silence. The first courses were always served to the senior servants, and only then to the rest of the staff. The senior servants had the privilege of retiring to a separate room after the main course. There they drank tea, discussed estate matters, and ate dessert. The junior staff remained in the common hall to quickly finish their portions and clear the table. This division underscored the status gap between the managers and the rank-and-file workers. Getting into that private room was the dream of every novice footman. This entire complex system of subordination ensured absolute order in the vast mansion. Every employee clearly knew their duties and the limits of acceptable behavior. The strict hierarchy eliminated disputes over who should perform a particular task. Do you agree that such a structure was the only way to manage such a large estate? In the next chapter, you will learn about the incredible difficulties the staff faced in heating the massive stone buildings. I will reveal the best-kept secret of the comfort of Victorian mansions. There was no central heating, and warmth depended entirely on the continuous operation of fireplaces and stoves. Dozens of fireplaces could be burning simultaneously in a vast estate, requiring constant attention. Maintaining the desired temperature in spacious halls with high ceilings was a real logistical challenge. Tons of coal were carried by hand from the cellars to the upper floors every day. The coal cellars were vast rooms where fuel was unloaded directly from barges. Workers filled heavy metal buckets with coal and carried them up steep staircases. Each bucket weighed several dozen kilograms, and they had to be lifted many times per shift. Fine coal dust settled on their faces, hands, and clothes, seeping into every crevice. This work required tremendous physical strength and incredible endurance. Lighting the enormous building was also a complex and continuous task. Before the advent of electricity, hundreds of oil lamps and wax candles were used. In the morning, the lamps were collected from all the rooms and taken to a special room for cleaning. The glass bulbs were washed, dried thoroughly, and polished with paper until they were perfectly clear. The wicks were carefully trimmed with scissors so that the flame would burn evenly and not produce soot. Filling the lamps with oil required precision, as spilled liquid left stains that were difficult to remove. The reservoirs were filled from large copper jugs, with strict attention paid to the fuel level. In the evening, the lamps were carried back to the rooms and placed on tables and mantelpieces. The process of lighting the lamps took a long time and was performed by the senior footman. The soft light of the lamps created that very atmosphere of coziness, so cherished by the aristocracy. Supplying the house with hot water was another colossal task for the basement staff. Huge copper cauldrons, built directly into brick ovens, were constantly boiling in the kitchen. To draw a bath, water had to be carried up to the upper floors in large metal jugs. Maids made dozens of trips up and down the stairs just to fill a single bath for the master. The cooled water was then scooped out with buckets and carried back downstairs. Washing laundry without running water turned into an exhausting process lasting several days. Laundry maids used huge wooden tubs, which they filled with boiling water from kitchen cauldrons. Heavy linen sheets were scrubbed on ribbed boards using harsh alkaline soap. Wringing out the wet fabric was done by hand, which required enormous physical effort. The laundry was dried in the open air or in special drying rooms with heated stoves. Caring for the aristocrats' clothing also required constant use of heat and steam. Velvet and silk were cleaned with special brushes over boiling water to raise the nap. Bulky dresses with numerous pleats and lace were ironed with small, intricately shaped irons. Valets and maids spent hours in the ironing rooms, bringing the outfits to perfection. The impeccable appearance of the estate's owners depended on the quality of this work. The technological limitations of the era were compensated for solely by the manual labor of an army of servants. Every convenience available to the residents of the upper floors was made possible by the efforts of these unseen workers. Their daily efforts created the luxurious facade of Victorian life that we see in movies. They transformed cold stone castles into warm and cozy residences. Be sure to like this video if you were impressed by this hidden side of history. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the harshest rules of internal staff etiquette. Life in a confined space required a strict set of laws governing every action and word. Relationships among staff were regulated no less strictly than the rules of conduct at a royal reception. Addressing one another was done exclusively according to one's position and status. Familiarity was not permitted even during leisure hours in the common room. Junior servants were required to address senior staff as Mr. or Mrs. The housekeeper was always addressed as Mrs., even if she had never been married. This emphasized her high status and required a respectful distance from the ordinary maids. The use of first names was permitted only when superiors addressed subordinates. This rule prevented the development of unwanted familiarity in the workplace. Subordination was observed not only in speech, but also in everyday gestures and postures. If the butler or housekeeper entered a room, junior staff were required to stand immediately. They were permitted to sit only after their superiors had taken their seats or given permission. It was forbidden to keep one's hands in one's pockets or lean on furniture in the presence of superiors. One's back had to remain straight and one's gaze respectfully lowered. Discussing the owners or their guests was strictly prohibited by the house rules. Any secrets overheard in the reception rooms were to remain within the walls of the house. Violation of this rule threatened immediate dismissal without a letter of recommendation. The butler strictly suppressed any conversations on personal topics during shared meals. The aristocrats' trust in their staff was based on a guarantee of absolute confidentiality. The staff's personal belongings were regularly inspected by the housekeeper. She checked closets for hidden food, alcohol, or illegal literature. Maintaining impeccable cleanliness in their own bedrooms was a mandatory requirement for every maid. Beds were made neatly, and uniforms were folded into neat piles. Any carelessness with personal belongings was viewed as a sign of general indiscipline. Leaving the estate was permitted only at strictly designated times. Employees were required to return before dark and check in with the footman on duty. Being late was punishable by a fine or a stern reprimand in front of the entire staff. When leaving the service, servants were required to behave modestly so as not to disgrace the house's reputation. Any inappropriate behavior in town was immediately reported to management. Teaching the rules of etiquette was part of the senior staff's responsibilities. Young footmen were taught to walk properly, open doors silently, and serve dishes elegantly. Their movements had to be smooth, precise, and free of haste. Every action was practiced until it became second nature in the empty basement corridors. The ideal servant was supposed to resemble a well-oiled, silent machine. These strict guidelines transformed a disparate group of people into a unified and obedient team. The system of rules suppressed individuality but ensured incredible efficiency. The servants willingly accepted these restrictions in exchange for a stable job and a roof over their heads. Do you think modern people could endure such strict control over their lives? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the actual food production factory in the estate's basements operated.
And mind your manners.
The kitchen of a Victorian mansion was a vast room filled with heat, steam, and constant movement. It was a veritable production facility, operating from early morning until late at night without a break. In the center stood a massive table made of thick oak planks for cutting ingredients. Along the walls were huge cast iron stoves, ovens, and copper kettles for boiling water. The ceilings were high to allow at least some of the smoke and hot air to escape. Organizing the cooking process required strict discipline and precise timing. The head cook directed the process, standing at the main table and issuing commands to her assistants. At the same time, complex broths that took hours to prepare were simmering, meat was roasting, and dough for pastries was being kneaded. Every dish on the 10-course menu had to be served strictly on time. A delay or cold food was considered a real disaster for the establishment's reputation. Preparing the ingredients required a tremendous amount of manual labor from the junior kitchen staff. Vegetables were peeled and chopped by the basketful using sharp, heavy knives. Meat was chopped with special hatchets on massive wooden blocks. Spices were ground in stone mortars until they became a fine powder. Mechanical devices were practically non-existent. Everything was done by hand. The storage rooms surrounding the kitchen were veritable food warehouses. In the cool rooms, hams, animal carcasses, and garlands of sausages hung from hooks. Jars of pickles and dry bulk goods stood in neat rows on wooden shelves. A separate dark room was set aside for storing root vegetables, apples, and cheeses. The food supply was intended to ensure the household's self-sufficiency for several weeks. Ice houses served as the equivalent of modern refrigerators and required special care. Huge blocks of ice were brought in from lakes during the winter and stacked in deep pits, layered with straw. These insulated rooms maintained a low temperature year-round. Perishable delicacies, butter, fresh milk, and expensive fish were stored here. A trip to the ice house was a daily duty to deliver fresh food to the kitchen. The preparation of desserts was considered the pinnacle of culinary art and was often entrusted to a separate specialist. Jellies, multi-tiered cakes, and intricate creams were crafted with jewel-like precision. Special copper molds were used to shape the dishes into castles or flowers. Sugar decorations were sculpted by hand using fine tools. Bringing the dessert into the grand dining room was always met with admiring glances from the guests. Cookware required no less careful maintenance than silverware. Copper pots and pans had to be regularly scrubbed with coarse salt and vinegar until they shone. This duty fell on the shoulders of the dishwashers, whose hands were constantly damaged by hot water and chemicals. Mountains of dirty dishes after a formal dinner could take until morning to wash. The sinks were deep stone basins into which boiling water was constantly poured. Communication between the kitchen and the formal dining room was facilitated by a system of elevators and footmen. Hot dishes were placed in special wooden boxes on a rope pulley. A kitchen worker would raise this lift to the upper floor, where it was received by the dining room staff. This allowed food to be delivered as quickly as possible, maintaining its temperature and perfect appearance. The coordination of these actions was perfected over the years. The servants' own meals differed sharply from what was served at the master's table. Simple, hearty, and inexpensive dishes, such as meat stews or porridge, were prepared for the staff. The use of expensive spices, exotic fruits, or wine for the servants was out of the question. Portions were large to provide the staff with the energy needed for heavy physical labor. Leftovers from the master's table were sometimes distributed among senior staff as a reward. The kitchen remained the noisiest and liveliest place in the entire vast house. It was always hot there, and the air was filled with the aroma of fresh bread and roasted meat. Despite the hard work, many considered the kitchen the coziest spot on the estate. During rare moments of calm, the staff could warm themselves by the stove and drink hot tea. This complex culinary machine provided the gastronomic splendor of the Victorian era. The secret, passed down from generation to generation, lies in the strict rules governing the staff's appearance. Servants' uniforms served not merely as work clothes, but as a clear marker of their status and affiliation with a particular household. The choice of fabrics, styles, and wardrobe details was subject to the strict traditions of Victorian society. Aristocrats spent enormous sums on their footmen's attire to demonstrate the family's wealth. A perfectly tailored livery impressed guests no less than the paintings on the walls. The footmen's liveries were made from expensive cloth in the brightest and most vibrant shades. The colors of the costume corresponded to the heraldic colors of the ruling family's coat of arms. The costume was adorned with gold or silver braids, massive coat of arms buttons, and velvet inserts. A snow-white starch plastron and a silk neckerchief were worn under the camisole. This entire ensemble was complemented by white gloves and special buckled shoes. The maids' uniforms were less colorful, but no less strictly regulated. In the morning, the girls wore dresses made of durable cotton with a fine pattern for doing dirty work. This outfit was complemented by a large, coarse apron that covered the dress almost entirely. In the afternoon, when light cleaning began, they changed into austere woolen dresses. Over this, they wore an elegant snow-white apron decorated with lace and a small hairpin. The butler never wore a colored livery. His attire emphasized his managerial status. During the day, he wore a formal dark jacket, striped trousers, and a gray tie. In the evening, the butler changed into a classic black tailcoat with a white shirt and a bow tie. Outwardly, he looked almost like a guest. which often confused inexperienced visitors to the house. The main difference was the absence of expensive jewelry and his deliberately modest demeanor. Hairstyles and hygiene were strictly monitored by the housekeeper and butler on a daily basis. Men were required to be clean-shaven. Beards and mustaches were prohibited. Hair was cut short and neatly styled using special pomades. Women gathered their hair into tight, smooth buns, hiding them under white bonnets or hairpins. Loose curls or bright makeup were considered absolutely unacceptable for a respectable maid. The cost of work clothes often fell on the workers themselves, especially at the lower levels. Maids had to buy the fabric themselves and sew their own cotton dresses according to an approved pattern.
Mind the suds, watch your step.
Expensive ceremonial liveries for footmen were ordered at the estate's expense from London's finest tailors. However, these uniforms remained the property of the employer and were returned upon the employee's dismissal. Damaging an expensive uniform was punished with hefty fines deducted from wages. Caring for the uniforms took up a significant portion of the staff's free time. In the evenings, maids washed their aprons, starched their collars, and sewed on missing buttons. Footmen cleaned their cloth uniforms with stiff brushes, removing even the tiniest specks of dust and stains. Shoes were polished with goudelin to a mirror-like shine every evening before bed. A neat appearance was the main requirement for keeping one's job in a wealthy household. Senior servants, such as the housekeeper, had more freedom in choosing their wardrobe. They wore dresses made of high-quality silk or taffeta in dark, elegant shades. Their clothing was meant to command respect, but not to outshine the mistresses of the house. A gold watch on a chain or a small brooch was permitted as a mark of distinction. This austere, elegant style emphasized their distance from the manual laborers. Butlers and maids often wore hand-me-downs from their high-ranking employers. A lady might give her maid a dress that had gone out of style that season. Butlers received slightly worn suits, shirts, and even the lord's shoes. This allowed them to look exceptionally elegant at minimal cost. Such a practice was considered normal and even prestigious among the service staff. Uniforms erased a person's individuality, turning them into a functional part of the interior. They defined a worker's place in the space and dictated their manner of behavior. Impeccably dressed servants created an atmosphere of order and centuries-old traditions. Have you ever wondered how much money was spent on maintaining such a large staff? In the next chapter, you'll learn the truth about the actual earnings and financial prospects of domestic servants. The financial aspects of a servant's life varied greatly depending on position and experience. Working in a large aristocratic household was considered prestigious and provided a stable, albeit modest income. The main advantage was full provision of housing, food, and work clothes. This allowed workers to save nearly all the cash they earned. Many young people from the countryside dreamed of entering service precisely for the opportunity to accumulate capital. Junior maids and dishwashers were at the very bottom of the pay scale. Their annual salary was a modest sum, comparable to a factory worker's income for several months. However, factory workers had to pay for their own food and housing out of that money. Domestic servants did not have such expenses, which made their actual financial situation more favorable. Wages were paid quarterly, in cash, handed over personally.
Don't worry. I'll alert.
Footmen earned significantly more, especially if they were tall and good-looking. Employers paid extra for physical attributes, as tall footmen looked more impressive in formal livery. In addition, they regularly received generous tips from guests, whether opening carriage doors or carrying luggage. These tips sometimes exceeded their official annual salary several times over. Thanks to this, many footmen were able to save a substantial sum over a few years of service. The butler and housekeeper received the highest salaries among all the staff. Their salaries could rival the incomes of low-level clerks or school teachers. They had the authority to manage the budget for purchasing groceries and supplies. Suppliers often paid them small commissions for steady orders for the large estate. This practice was unspoken but widespread and was considered a normal supplement to their income. French chefs and personal chambermaids from Paris were worth their weight in gold. Aristocrats were willing to pay enormous sums for foreign specialists to impress their guests. The salary of a renowned chef could be twice that of an English butler. They often dictated their own contract terms and demanded special privileges. The presence of a foreigner on the staff served as a marker of the family's highest prestige. The workday was not limited to standard hours and often lasted 15 hours a day. Days off were granted extremely rarely, usually once every 2 weeks for half a day. The concept of annual paid leave simply did not exist at that time. Employees could ask for a few days off to visit their families, but this was not guaranteed by contract. A person's entire life was completely subject to the rhythm and needs of the employer. Dismissal could occur at any moment for the slightest reason. Spilled tea, a rude word, or suspicion of theft led to immediate termination. The harshest punishment was dismissal without a letter of recommendation from the former employer. Without this document, finding a new decent job was practically impossible. The recommendation served as the servant's primary passport and guarantee of reliability. The state provided no pension benefits for domestic staff. Older servants who had devoted their entire lives to a single family were completely dependent on the Lord's mercy. Noble employers often allowed elderly workers to remain on the estate, assigning them light work in the garden or storerooms. Some were granted a small allowance from the family's personal funds. However, those who changed employers often ended up in workhouses in their old age. Savings books became popular specifically among domestic servants in the second half of the 19th century. Servants regularly deposited their quarterly wages at post offices. These savings allowed young women to accumulate a decent dowry for a future marriage. Men dreamed of saving enough to open their own pub or small shop. Service on the estate was viewed as a temporary step toward starting an independent life. The financial system within the estate was transparent and strictly hierarchical. Everyone knew exactly what their worth was on the labor market and what they could aspire to. This stability attracted thousands of young people from poor families, ready for hard work. Service guaranteed food and shelter in an era of economic upheaval. Behind the hard labor lay a clear financial calculation and the hope for a better future.
Keep the fire stoked.
Free time was a rare luxury in the domestic staff's packed schedule. The few hours of rest usually fell in the evening after the employers had gone to bed. The center of social life below the stairs was the servants' common room, where a long wooden table stood. Here, maids, footmen, and kitchen staff gathered to rest from their exhausting work. Senior staff, meanwhile, rested in their own separate, comfortable room. Reading became one of the main pastimes for many literate workers. Cheap serialized novels, printed on poor quality paper, were passed from hand to hand. Newspapers read by the Lord and left in the drawing room were carefully taken down to the cellar. The news was discussed over evening tea with no less fervor than in the aristocratic clubs of London. Housekeepers often encouraged the reading of religious and edifying texts to uphold morality. Handicrafts occupied all the free evenings of the female staff. The girls mended their aprons, knitted warm stockings, and embroidered scarves. This activity was both useful and soothing after a hard day's work. While working, they would quietly sing folk songs or tell stories from their home villages. Doing needlework together fostered a sense of sisterhood among the young female workers. Card or dice games were strictly forbidden in most respectable households. It was believed that gambling led to debt, quarrels, and a breakdown in discipline. Butlers regularly searched the footmen's quarters for hidden decks of cards or chips. Nevertheless, playing dominoes or checkers was often permitted and popular among the men. Quiet but intense battles unfolded over the wooden boards. Music also found its place in the life of the basement floors. One of the footmen might play the harmonica or a simple violin. On holidays, with the housekeeper's permission, small dances were held right in the stone corridor. These rare moments of fun helped relieve the accumulated tension. Musical evenings brought the staff together and brightened the monotony of their gray daily lives. The annual ball for the servants was the main event of the year on large estates. On this day, the aristocrats traditionally ceded the ballroom to their staff. The lord and lady might even dance the first dance with the housekeeper and the butler, demonstrating their favor. The servants donned their finest attire and were treated to dishes specially prepared for them. It was a time when the rigid boundaries between social classes were erased for one evening. Attending church on Sunday was considered mandatory for all staff. The staff would put on clean clothes and march in formation to the local parish church. Inside, they occupied specially reserved pews at the back of the nave. After the service, they were allowed to take a short walk around the village and chat with acquaintances from other estates. For many, this was their only chance to leave the estate grounds all week. Exchanging news and stories remained a favorite pastime during these rare breaks. Servants discussed the guest's attire, the master's behavior, and possible romances upstairs. This information was passed along in whispers while cleaning silverware or ironing laundry together. Being privy to the family's affairs often gave the staff a sense of secret power. However, taking these secrets outside the house was strictly forbidden. Letters from home were a long-awaited event for those who had come from afar. Literate workers read the messages aloud to their less educated colleagues. Writing replies often turned into a collective process around a large table. These letters connected people to their families and the past lives they had left behind to earn a living. Paper and ink were carefully stored in personal wooden boxes. Despite the harsh restrictions, life below the stairs did not consist solely of constant tension. People found joy in simple things, friendship, and shared entertainment. They formed their own community with rules, traditions, and inside jokes. This close-knit community helped them survive the harsh conditions of hard physical labor. They knew how to appreciate the tiny crumbs of freedom that their contract afforded them. The career ladder in a Victorian estate was long and required incredible perseverance. A person might enter the house as an unknown assistant and end their life as a respected butler. This path took decades of impeccable service, discipline, and constant learning. Every step upward was accompanied by a rise in status, improved living conditions, and a higher salary. Loyalty to a single family was often the key factor for promotion. The pinnacle of a woman's career was the position of housekeeper. To hold this position, one needed not only impeccable cleaning skills, but also administrative talent. A housekeeper had to be able to count money, keep expense ledgers, and manage a large staff. Widows or women who had consciously chosen not to marry for the sake of their careers were often appointed to this position. Their status was unshakable, and their word was considered law for all the women in the household. For boys, a career often began with a position as a shoe shiner or stable hand. They could then become junior footmen, a role that required good manners and a neat appearance. A footman learned how to set the table properly, pour wine, and move silently through the formal dining room. A handsome appearance and tall stature significantly accelerated one's career advancement. Footmen often accompanied their masters on trips, which broadened their horizons. The most intelligent and loyal footman could hope to become a personal valet. This was a position based on the Lord's absolute trust. The valet knew all the secrets of his employer's wardrobe, schedule, and personal life. He traveled with his master, stayed in the finest hotels, and wore excellent clothing. This job required impeccable taste and the ability to keep secrets. The position of butler was the absolute pinnacle of a career for any male servant. The path to it lay through years of impeccable service as a senior footman or valet. The butler managed a wine cellar worth a fortune and was responsible for all the silver in the house. He had the authority to hire and fire male staff at his discretion. Not only the servants, but the aristocrats themselves held a good butler in high regard. Cooks followed a different path, as their careers depended entirely on culinary talent. Starting with peeling potatoes, a talented young woman could gradually learn the secrets from the head chef. The art of creating complex sauces and desserts was highly valued. Renowned cooks could move from one wealthy household to another, demanding a raise. Their authority in the kitchen was absolutely unquestionable. Promotion often depended on the ability to avoid conflict and please superiors. Loyalty was valued more highly than initiative or creative thinking. Strict adherence to rules and traditions was the key to success in this conservative environment. Those who tried to disrupt the order remained in lower positions for a long time. The system weeded out the rebellious and rewarded the obedient and hardworking. A successful career on the estate ensured a person respect and a comfortable old age. Former dishwashers and assistants became respectable managers of vast estates. Their journey proved that perseverance and discipline bear fruit even within the harshest class system. They became living symbols of the stability and reliability of the Victorian era. This difficult yet clear path to the top motivated generations of young workers. The golden age of British estates and vast domestic staffs began to wane at the start of the 20th century. Changes in the economy and society gradually eroded the foundation of this complex social system. The advent of new technologies rendered many domestic professions simply unnecessary. Electric lighting eliminated the need to clean and refill hundreds of oil lamps every day. Central heating permanently did away with the hard labor of carrying coal and cleaning fireplaces. World War I dealt a crushing blow to the aristocracy's traditional way of life. Young footmen and servants flocked to the front, leaving the estates short-handed. Many of them never returned to their dark cellars and pantries. Those who did return no longer wanted to go back to their former existence and the strict rules of subordination. The war had changed their mindsets, giving them a sense of self-worth and equality. Women also found new opportunities outside the walls of the manor houses. Industrial development and the opening of factories created a demand for female labor with regular hours. Young women preferred to work at machines for a fixed wage and have their evenings free. Professions such as typists, telephone operators, and saleswomen seemed far more attractive and modern. The work of a maid began to be associated with backwardness and complete subordination. The tax burden on the aristocracy increased significantly in the post-war years. Maintaining vast estates and hundreds of employees became unaffordable even for the wealthiest families. Estate owners were forced to downsize their staff, retaining only the most essential servants. Huge wings of castles were simply closed off and covered with tarps due to a lack of funds to heat them. Lavish receptions for hundreds of guests became a rarity. Technological advances in the kitchen also contributed to a reduction in staff. The advent of gas stoves and refrigerators significantly simplified food storage and preparation. Vacuum cleaners and washing machines took over the most physically demanding tasks of housekeeping. Now a single maid could handle a workload that previously required 3 people. Mechanization became synonymous with economy and modernity. Society's attitude toward the concept of domestic servants also changed. New ideas made the ostentatious consumption of others' labor an outdated phenomenon. Aristocrats learned to drive cars on their own and even to cook simple meals. The presence of a large staff of uniformed footmen began to elicit incomprehension rather than respect in the new society. Formality and strict etiquette gave way to a more relaxed lifestyle. By the mid-20th century, most of England's great houses had been abandoned or sold. Huge mansions were converted into schools, institutions, or museums open to the public. Former servants' quarters were repurposed as storage spaces or administrative offices. Silence fell upon those corridors where the life of an invisible army of workers had once bustled. The era of grand service was a thing of the past, leaving behind only the architecture. Former estate workers adapted to the new reality with varying degrees of success. Some opened their own small hotels or guest houses, putting their acquired hospitality skills to use. Others found work in the service industry on modern ocean liners or in restaurants. Skills in impeccable housekeeping, sewing, and cooking have always remained in demand. They have become the last guardians of vanishing standards of impeccable quality. Today we can learn about life below the stairs only from historical archives and records. These people left behind neatly written recipe books, fabric bills, and duty rosters. Their labor was the foundation upon which the cultural grandeur of the Victorian era rested. Without their calloused hands and endless patience, luxury would have been impossible. They deserve to have their story told honestly and without embellishment. The era of servants has ended, but its lessons in organization, discipline, and hard work remain impressive to this day. A system built on strict class divisions has proven unviable in the modern world. Nevertheless, the scale of that invisible work commands sincere respect. A vast historical layer is finally emerging from the shadows of the grand halls. It was real life, with its difficulties, joys, and remarkable fortitude.
As always.
Which topic from the lives of people in the last century do you find most interesting to explore in depth? Suggest topics for future videos that you'd like to see on our channel in the comments, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos.